Recently, loot boxes have come under fire since they are appearing in what feels like every single AAA game that is released now. We see it in games like Star Wars Battlefront 2, Assassin's Creed, Forza 7, and even a recent leak seems to show loot boxes in Call of Duty WW2. So what do all of these games have in common other than loot boxes? Well, they all have a full price tag of $60 attached to them. These companies are looking to make an absolute killing from the initial sale of the game as well as recurring revenue from loot boxes. For those unsure as to what I'm talking about from possibly being out of the loop, a loot box is essentially an item that contains a randomized item based on a number generator. So when you purchase and open a loot box, a random number is created in the background and an item is presented based on what number is drawn. There are, of course, odds in the background for how likely you are to get an item from different tiers such as common all the way to rare. Now, loot boxes are technically not a new concept. You can easily compare a loot box to a booster pack from a card game like Pokemon. You would buy a booster pack with the chance to get a rare card that you wanted, but it would of course take multiple booster packs to possibly get the one card you were looking for. Trust me, I experienced that empty feeling missing out on Charizard back in the late 90s despite spending my weekly allowance on booster packs every single month. But of course, booster packs were regulated more than loot boxes, and we'll touch on that later on. Now, where did loot boxes come from? Back during the days of World of Warcraft and other MMOs, loot boxes were technically present in a very, very primitive form known as random drops. Sure, you weren't spending money, but instead you were hunting down bosses in raids, hoping to get that one item you needed from the defeated boss. Those drops were randomized when the boss was defeated, and it was up to the group to decide who could keep it. It seems that after some time, companies realized that people would be willing to pay to have that random pull happen without defeating the boss and skipping most of the game altogether to get the reward right away. So how do you profit heavily off of this without just giving the items away for a set price? Enter the loot box. It was in 2007, the first iteration of a randomly generated box appeared in a Chinese mobile game known as ZT Online. Later on, in 2010, loot boxes appeared to American audiences in Team Fortress 2. The idea here was simple: give away the game for free and dangle two options in front of the player. Either grind your way to loot boxes, which can take hours, or pay a small fee and open one right now. While you may be asking, who actually spends money on these boxes when you can just play the game and earn them? Well, the vast majority of people will play and earn the money needed. However, those that do buy the boxes buy in droves. In fact, we even have a term that is used for these types of people: whales. And you might even be surprised by who these whales are. You might figure, well, they are well-off gamers who have money to burn and throw hundreds of dollars at a free-to-play game or a game with loot boxes. But you'd be wrong. See, whales generally buy in smaller amounts, but do so over time. In fact, according to Delta DNA, the typical transaction size in 2015 for free-to-play games is $20. You may have recently watched IGN spend $100 on Shadow of War's currency system, but this is not at all the typical behavior of a whale. Generally, they rack up tons of transactions, not realizing how much they have actually spent until it's too late. There was a great episode of South Park that covered this entirely, with Stan getting his family thousands of dollars in the hole from one free-to-play game. Unfortunately, that part is not fiction and isn't even blown out of proportion. It literally happens in real life all the time. Now, we just spent some time talking more about free-to-play games that take advantage of players without patience, but loot boxes work off of another weakness many feel, and that is addiction. Specifically, an addiction to gambling, or in this case, compulsive gambling. Have you ever had the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the next pull of the slot machine might net you a win? Or maybe the next booster pack will finally be the one? Of course you have. We all have. However, some have this feeling heightened and have a hard time resisting, so they throw more money in only to be disappointed if they don't win. How do they cope with that feeling? More money! The cycle continues until the person runs out of money or stops and realizes what they were doing is getting out of control. Loot boxes absolutely work from this compulsive gambling feeling. They know the power of that feeling and want you to feel it so you'll reach into your wallets and spend next month's rent on digital items. It's an extremely dangerous practice, especially considering the audience that is being introduced to this with little to no regulation are kids. Remember how I mentioned booster packs had more regulation than loot boxes? Well, that's because back in the early days, you needed your parents to drive you to the store and would let you pick out 1 or 2 packs. They wouldn't give you the keys to their car, their wallet, and turn around while you drove to the store and ran up their credit card. Unfortunately, this has become a reality for some parents, as kids have been found to unknowingly, to the parent, take a parent's credit card and use it online to spend on free-to-play games all the time. Even if kids don't do that, they are still being introduced to gambling at a very early age and are learning to relate money with chance and essentially spinning the roulette wheel. It's not good. And now fast forward to 2017, and companies have figured out they can bring the worst part about the free-to-play games to AAA games while leaving behind the best part, it being free to play. Instead, you need to pay the price of admission to play the game, buy the DLC, and possibly buy into their loot boxes. In fact, if these companies were smart, they would give the game away for free and add loot boxes because they stand to make substantially more on loot boxes if their audience size is larger, which it would be if the game was free to play in the first place. But it really is hard to blame developers for this. Overwatch became a $1 billion game in a year, mostly thanks to their loot boxes. It's hard to look at the greener grass on the other side and not buy the same fertilizer. Still, the loot box system is dangerous, and I believe regulations are absolutely needed. You may not 100% believe it, but this is gambling just dressed up. You are essentially pulling a slot machine lever whenever you hit open a loot box. In fact, at this point, the only thing separating the two is one gives you a chance for money, while the other gives you a chance at in-game items. I think this is the only thing that is protecting the loot box system from being heavily regulated, but it is still dangerous and still pulls from that compulsive gambling addictions that people face. It's just now they are targeting an audience that is too young to walk into a casino. Now the question remains, what do we do about this? Well, the sad answer here is not much. You are probably going to have to get used to this. See, you can say that you won't buy the game at all, but the majority still will. You could say I won't buy a single loot box, but the whales still will. Look at something like Fire Emblem Heroes. It managed to make over $100 million in its first 6 months, despite only 10 million downloads. This is on mobile platforms where a $10 Super Mario Run is considered expensive. All I can tell you is this. Sadly, loot boxes are here to stay despite fan backlash. The only way anything would change is if regulations affect the loot box system itself. However, companies just seem to get around it anyway. At the start of 2016, for example, China announced that not only would odds need to be displayed for any and all loot boxes open in games, you would not be able to directly sell loot boxes to customers. They even went as far as to classify loot boxes as lottery tickets. So what does Blizzard do? Easy. Sell currency for money and gift players loot boxes. They could still pass loot boxes to players without directly selling it to them in China. And companies will stay the course with loot boxes because they work, and until there are laws to stop them from doing so, it will continue to get worse. Expect them to push you more and more towards loot boxes with heavy grinds and hard to get items unless you pull out your wallet. I miss the simpler days and fear for the future of games, mostly because I don't expect any of these companies to reinvest these big earnings into a better game. If there is anything mobile free-to-play games have shown, it's that lazy game design is fine as long as you can trigger that gambling addiction inside of people. But as always, I'm curious what you guys think. Leave a comment down below with your opinion on loot boxes, and if you have not already subscribed, please consider subscribing and hit the like button. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.